Today, we are discussing a topic that continues to generate major debate among followers of the Iraqi dinar around the world. The statement we are analyzing is centered around a question many investors and currency observers have asked for years. Why do some people believe the Iraqi dinar could eventually return to levels above $4 in value, especially when the currency was once worth approximately $3.22 during the era of Saddam Hussein? This discussion is important because it touches on history, economics, reconstruction, oil wealth, monetary policy, and the long-term future of Iraq's economy. At the same time, it is also important to separate emotion from economic reality and examine these claims carefully through a professional financial lens. The argument presented is relatively straightforward. Supporters of higher Iraqi dinar valuations point out that before the Gulf War and the years of sanctions that followed, Iraq's currency was officially valued at over $3 per dinar. They also argue that after more than 2 decades of rebuilding efforts, Iraq now possesses major oil reserves, natural resources, infrastructure projects, and financial assets that could theoretically support a stronger national currency in the future. Now, from a historical standpoint, it is true that the Iraqi dinar once carried a significantly higher official exchange rate. During the 1970s and 1980s, Iraq was one of the wealthier countries in the region. In terms of oil revenue per capita, the Iraqi government maintained a strong centralized economic system, backed heavily by oil exports. At that time, the dinar had limited circulation outside the country. Exchange controls were strict, and the state played a dominant role in determining the official currency rate. However, the economic environment back then was completely different from what Iraq faces today. Modern Iraq operates in a much more globally connected financial system. The country has gone through wars, sanctions, political instability, insurgencies, infrastructure destruction, and major monetary expansion over the last several decades. All of these factors changed the structure of the Iraqi economy and the dynamics surrounding the dinar. One of the key points analysts often discuss is the difference between nominal exchange rates and actual purchasing strength. A currency can have a high nominal value against the US dollar without necessarily reflecting broad economic prosperity. Some countries maintain artificially strong exchange rates through government controls, limited convertibility, or restricted currency supply. Therefore, when people compare today's dinar to historical exchange rates from decades ago, economists caution that the comparison is not always straightforward. At the same time, Iraq undeniably remains one of the world's most resource-rich countries. Iraq possesses enormous proven oil reserves, and oil exports continue to provide the overwhelming majority of government revenue. In addition, Iraq has strategic geographic importance, agricultural potential, expanding infrastructure development, and a relatively young population. These factors are often cited by optimistic observers who believe the country has the capacity for long-term economic expansion. Over the last several years, Iraq has also taken steps towards stabilizing its financial system. The government and the Central Bank of Iraq have worked to modernize banking operations, improve electronic payment systems, reduce dependence on cash transactions, and strengthen anti-money laundering measures. International financial institutions have repeatedly emphasized the importance of banking reform and fiscal discipline for Iraq's future economic growth. Another important issue is foreign reserves. Iraq has periodically reported strong foreign currency reserve levels supported by oil revenues, especially during periods of higher global oil prices. Foreign reserves are important because they help central banks maintain currency stability, finance imports, and reassure international investors. Strong reserves can support confidence in a national currency, although reserves alone do not automatically lead to dramatic exchange rate increases. This is where the discussion about a hypothetical $4 dinar becomes more complex. In practical economic terms, The value of a currency is connected not only to national wealth, but also to money supply, productivity, trade balance, fiscal policy, inflation control, and overall economic structure. One of the biggest realities facing Iraq today is that the amount of dinar in circulation is dramatically larger than it was decades ago. Over years of conflict and economic pressure, Iraq expanded its monetary base significantly. A larger money supply generally places downward pressure on currency value unless matched by equivalent economic productivity and demand. This is one reason why many economists argue that comparisons between the old Iraqi dinar and the modern dinar must be approached carefully. For example, if a country has trillions of units of currency circulating in the economy, achieving extremely high exchange rates becomes mathematically and economically difficult without major structural changes. A dramatic revaluation to extremely high levels could create enormous monetary imbalances unless accompanied by redenomination policies, economic restructuring, or gradual market reforms. This leads us to another topic frequently discussed among dinar followers: redenomination versus revaluation. These two concepts are often confused, but they are very different economically. A redenomination occurs when a country removes zeros from its currency for accounting simplicity and public confidence. This does not necessarily increase real purchasing power. Many countries around the world have redenominated currencies after periods of inflation. Turkey is a well-known example where zeros were removed from the lira during financial reforms. A revaluation, on the other hand, refers to an increase in the official value of a currency relative to foreign currencies. Revaluations can occur gradually or suddenly, but they usually happen within carefully managed economic frameworks and are tied to broader monetary policy goals. In Iraq's case, discussions about potential future exchange rate adjustments have circulated for years. However, the Central Bank of Iraq consistently emphasizes monetary stability, inflation management, and financial sector reform as primary objectives. Policymakers generally prefer controlled and predictable currency management rather than sudden disruptive changes. From a short-term perspective, the Iraqi dinar's outlook remains closely linked to oil prices, government spending, political stability, and regional security conditions. Iraq's economy is still highly dependent on crude oil exports, meaning fluctuations in global energy markets have a direct impact on government revenues and economic performance. When oil prices are strong, Iraq typically experiences improved fiscal conditions, stronger reserves, and better government liquidity. This can support greater confidence in the financial system. On the other hand, falling oil prices can place pressure on the budget and create challenges for public spending and infrastructure investment. Political stability is another critical factor. International investors closely monitor governance, anti-corruption efforts, security developments, and institutional reforms inside Iraq. Sustainable economic growth requires long-term confidence in the country's legal and financial systems. Restructured development also plays a major role in Iraq's economic future. Over the past several years, Iraq has announced projects involving transportation, energy, housing, ports, and industrial development. If implemented effectively, these projects could improve productivity and diversify economic activity beyond oil dependence. Diversification is extremely important because economies that rely too heavily on a single export commodity often face greater volatility. Iraq's long-term strength will likely depend not only on oil revenues, but also on whether the country can develop manufacturing, agriculture, technology, logistics, and private sector growth. Another point worth analyzing is public perception and psychological confidence in the dinar. Currency strength is influenced not only by technical fundamentals, but also by trust. Citizens, businesses, and international partners must believe in the stability and reliability of the financial system. The Iraqi government has attempted to encourage greater confidence through banking modernization initiatives and digital financial reforms. Electronic payment systems have expanded in recent years, and authorities continue pushing for reduced dependence on cash-based transactions. These measures can improve transparency and help integrate Iraq more deeply into the global financial system. International relationships also matter. Iraq maintains economic ties with multiple countries and institutions, including the United States, regional partners, international energy companies, and organizations such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Cooperation with these institutions can support financial reform efforts and attract investment. For IQD followers, one of the biggest questions is whether Iraq's long-term economic trajectory could eventually support a significantly stronger currency compared to current levels. The answer from most professional economists is nuanced. Yes, Iraq has substantial long-term economic potential due to its resource wealth and strategic importance. Yes, strong institutions, better governance, infrastructure investment, and financial modernization could improve economic stability over time. And yes, currencies can strengthen gradually under the right economic conditions. However, most mainstream financial analysts also caution against unrealistic expectations of sudden overnight wealth scenarios or extreme exchange rate predictions, disconnected from economic fundamentals. Sustainable currency appreciation usually happens gradually and reflects broad economic improvements rather than speculation alone. It is also important to understand that exchange rates are policy tools. Governments and central banks often maintain exchange rates at levels they believe support economic competitiveness, trade, fiscal management, and financial stability. A currency that becomes too strong too quickly can sometimes hurt exports and create unintended economic pressures. For Iraq specifically, policymakers must balance inflation control, public sector salaries, imports, and oil revenues while managing overall monetary stability. These are highly complex challenges, requiring long-term planning rather than rapid currency shifts. Another major consideration is population growth and government obligations. Iraq has a growing population and significant public spending commitments, including salaries, subsidies, and infrastructure needs. Managing these obligations while maintaining fiscal discipline remains a central challenge for the Iraqi government. At the same time, there are reasons why many observers remain optimistic about Iraq's future compared to previous decades. The defeat of major extremist threats, ongoing reconstruction efforts, expanding regional cooperation, and energy sector investments have created opportunities that did not exist during earlier periods of instability. Global demand for energy also continues to keep Iraq relevant in international markets. Even as the world gradually discusses energy transitions, oil remains a critical component of the global economy, and Iraq's reserves continue to represent a major strategic asset. In addition, Iraq has increasingly focused on integrating into regional trade and development projects. Improved transportation corridors, port development, and energy cooperation with neighboring countries could potentially strengthen Iraq's economic position over time. For Iraqi Dinar followers, this means the long-term story surrounding Iraq is more about gradual economic transformation than dramatic instant outcomes. Investors and observers who follow Iraq responsibly often focus on indicators such as GDP growth, foreign reserves, inflation rates, banking reforms, oil production capacity, and political stability rather than relying purely on speculative rumors. One important lesson from global financial history is that rebuilding nations often require decades of institutional development before achieving stable and diversified economic growth. Iraq's rebuilding process has faced enormous obstacles, including security challenges, political fragmentation, and infrastructure damage accumulated over many years. Despite these challenges, Iraq has continued moving forward in several key sectors. Energy infrastructure has expanded, reconstruction projects continue, and international companies remain involved in various economic initiatives. Progress may sometimes appear slower than expected, But long-term development tends to occur gradually rather than overnight. Another topic frequently discussed among IQD followers is the relationships between national wealth and currency valuation. While natural resources can strengthen a country's economic foundation, resources alone do not guarantee a high currency value. Economic management, productivity, institutional trust, and monetary discipline remain equally important. Countries with large natural resources can still experience weak currencies if inflation, instability, or fiscal imbalances become severe. Conversely, some countries with fewer natural resources maintain stronger currencies due to diversified economies and stable institutions. This is why professional analysts evaluate a wide range of indicators when assessing currency outlooks. The Iraqi dinar conversation also highlights the emotional connection many people have with Iraq's economic recovery. For Iraqis themselves, the stability of the national currency represents more than exchange rates. It reflects sovereignty, reconstruction, public confidence, and hopes for long-term prosperity after decades of hardship. That emotional dimension is understandable, but financial analysis must still remain grounded in realistic economic frameworks. Responsible commentary requires balancing optimism about Iraq's future potential with recognition of the challenges that still exist. In the near term, Iraq's economic performance will likely continue depending heavily on oil revenues, fiscal management, and reform implementation. Global energy markets, regional geopolitics, and domestic political developments will remain major influences on financial stability. In the longer terms, successful diversification, stronger institutions, improved infrastructure, and banking modernization could gradually strengthen Iraq's overall economic position. Whether that eventually leads to meaningful currency appreciation depends on many interconnected factors that evolve over time. For viewers following IQD developments, the most important approach is staying informed through credible economic information rather than relying solely on speculation circulating online. Central bank statements, budget reforms, reserve data, international investment trends, and economic policy changes often provide more reliable insight into Iraq's direction than sensational predictions. Ultimately, the idea that Iraq possesses the assets and resources to support long-term economic growth is not unreasonable. Iraq remains a country with enormous potential, but translating resource wealth into sustained currency strength requires stable governance, disciplined monetary policy, economic diversification, infrastructure progress, and long-term institutional trust. The comparison to the historical 3.22 exchange rate remains an interesting part of Iraqi financial history. But modern economic realities are significantly different from the conditions that existed decades ago. Today's Iraq operates in a more complex global financial environment with different monetary structures and economic pressures. Still, many analysts agree that Iraq's future trajectory will be shaped not only by oil wealth, but by how effectively the country manages reform, investment, transparencies, and economic modernization over the coming years. Those are the factors likely to determine the long-term strength and credibility of Iraq's financial system. As always, we encourage viewers to approach Iraqi dinar discussions with patience, realism, and a focus on verified economic information rather than emotional speculation. Responsible analysis means recognizing both opportunities and risks while maintaining balanced expectations. Thank you for watching Iraqi Dinar News. If you appreciate factual, responsible, and balanced updates about Iraq's economy and the Iraqi dinar, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video so you never miss future developments. And remember, this content is provided for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered financial, investment, or trading advice.